Welcome to another episode of Mission Compliance, Unleashing Growth Potential for Defense Contractors. In today's episode, we explore the ethics of artificial intelligence in defense, a topic that sparks intense debate and demands careful consideration. As AI continues to reshape the landscape of defense applications, questions about responsibility, accountability, and ethical implications arise. Join us as we dive deep into the complexities of AI in defense, seeking to understand how we can harness its potential while upholding the ethical principles and safeguarding human rights. Together, let's uncover the ethical challenges, envision the future, and explore pathways to ensure responsible AI implementation in defense. Let's do this. We're joined once again today by Mike Frieder, President of On-Call Compliance Solutions and a CMC registered practitioner and CMC certified professional assessor. Thanks for joining us, Mike.
Hey, pleasure to be here, Roman. Thanks for having me.
As usual. So, Mike, in previous episodes, we've touched on artificial intelligence here and there, but today we're talking more fully about the presence and effect of AI in the defense community. So, how can we ensure that the use of AI in defense aligns with ethical principles and human rights?
It's great question. And I think number one is I don't think that I have a very good answer for that. I'll call this one an opinion piece rather than a factual answer. And I'm always
Fair
trying
enough.
to make sure people are aware of that when it happens. So that I think that there are some moral and ethical issues around artificial intelligence when it comes to defense. I'm not going to sort of delve into the moral part of it. Things like, hey, should we have artificial intelligence flying these planes versus humans, to save lives and things like that. I think that's probably better left for another forum. But what I will say is that there is a lot of AI use that has been flagged in the use of defense work that's pretty concerning. And here's where it comes from. As a defense contractor, you have an ethical and frankly legal obligation to not wind up submitting controlled unclassified information into these artificial intelligence systems. So the classic example is you want to extract an answer or figure out something, and you go to let's say ChatGPT, right? That's the classic one. We go to ChatGPT and we enter in some proprietary information about an F-35 fighter plane to try to get an answer out of ChatGPT. Well, depending upon what you've entered, if what you've entered is non-public information, this is a huge data breach, right? So this is an information security incident, it's a cyber incident, and we're in big trouble because on basically every one of these artificial intelligence systems, there are end user license agreements that you have to actually click I agree to just to use the system. And part of that is that they get to store and process your data that you're inputting, and that's theirs forever. And I think a lot of people from an ethical perspective are just simply not aware that that's the deal, right? To use their systems, they get to keep your data. And there's obviously major privacy concerns, which is a huge deal. And I think that primarily for defense contractors, the big question is, look, we've got these amazing tools out here, and they would love to use them, but yet you can't use them because you can't submit some of the input because it's CUI. So I think that I would point to that as the most obvious tripwire for defense contractors that I think they ought to know about. And look, it is a moral and ethical issue, right? It's to use these systems or to not use these systems. There's no government version of ChatGPT, so what do you do? So that's a real challenge. And then I think you also get into the moral and ethical challenges of what happens in defense when you begin to remove the people from defense and you start really integrating sort of machine decision making, which is what ChatGPT and a lot of these other artificial intelligence platforms are. And I'll just reflect back on sort of a lesson that I learned from a very rapidly scaling precision machine company. It was said to me, Mike, if we can spend $1 million to replace a human with a robot, that can run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and doesn't show up sick and doesn't show up drunk and doesn't have, divorces and ethical issues, I will do it every single time. And I won't kid you, I'm a CEO, right? Like I run a defense business, and I don't disagree with that. I mean, we've made moves in our business. For instance, we've made moves, and I'll use a fairly easy one to understand. We have copywriters. We were getting ready to hire 3 copywriters for our staff. We eliminated that when ChatGPT really broke out, because all we had to do is go to ChatGPT, give it subject matter, and it would basically write the articles, frankly, faster and better than any human can. Why would I hire those 3 people? So I think that's another larger scale issue that a lot of people are dealing with right now. You're talking about the Hollywood writers and the Hollywood Guild union strikes right now because they're afraid that AI can essentially sit there and replicate people like Brad Pitt. And I mean, and they're right. I mean, it's a genuine fear. So, will there be new jobs created by AI? Sure. And is that a moral and ethical issue? Sure. But I think that all of these things have to be considered in defense businesses, especially if you're a smaller defense business, which is one, how can you leverage it to grow your business and do better in terms of defense wins? But then next, is it morally and ethically right to do that? And you've got laws, particularly DFARS, NIST, and CMMC, where some of that compute power isn't even in the United States. So then you've got ITAR violations. So you do have to really strongly consider the implications of using AI in the defense industry. It's a phenomenal point.
Okay, on a previous episode, you mentioned that AI isn't truly autonomous. It's referred to as artificial intelligence, but I believe that it is more closely tied to supplemental intelligence, because there has to be some human there to give it commands, to put in the information that it needs, whatever. So it's not truly autonomous because of the need for human operation. But with that sometimes comes human error. So what are some potential risks and challenges associated with deploying AI in defense, and how can we mitigate them?
Again, it's just a phenomenal topic, and I'll just kind of recap on my comments from earlier, which is the way that artificial intelligence works. First off, it's really not artificial intelligence. ChatGPT, again, I'll just use this as the great example because everybody knows it. It's a language learning model. So in other words, it ingests a very, very large data set where you show the computers an object per se, right? And the machine gets an opportunity to sort of recognize and catalog that. And then humans have to actually create the description that goes along with that. This is done in places like autonomous driving. So you have people who are basically going out there with pictures of a road sign, and then you have a human that labels that road sign a stop sign, and then teaches that to the machine. When I say teaches it, I mean they basically have a massive database, that's doing all of that. So this is not real intelligence by any stretch of the imagination. What this actually is it is immense cataloging and indexing of data. And then that data is then, essentially fed patterns of people's speech. And so, those patterns of speech are essentially being broken down into mathematical patterns and things like that. Like there's no real, the machine thinks for itself, but the machine is given decision-making guidance based on if and then statements, if, then, and. No different than a computer program, right? So it can't ever get more sort of intelligent than that. Even if it was to get emotional sort of decision making, you still have to basically say, okay, emotion is a randomized equation on how you'll interpret it. Here's a great example, right? I have little kids. Now, if my daughter, who is 6 years old, takes a tumble and scratches her knee, there are 2 ways that she can react to that. She can sort of break out in a big ball of tears, or she can suck it up and keep going like nothing happened. That is typically based on a response or an input that comes from the parent who is around her. And so there is an ability to essentially mechanize that level of decision making. It also doesn't mean that you couldn't have a random reaction, which is, let's say, if mom treats a fall as an emotional event, has to coddle the child, and dad treats the fall as a suck it up, let's go, and ignores it event, and that's how the child normally reacts, you can throw in some level of randomization where essentially it says, well, once every fourth or fifth fall, dad's going to actually coddle the child because maybe that was serious, or maybe there's a level of severity. So it's all math. I don't really feel that it's the same thing where humans quite literally, I don't know if it's, you could call it a, sort of, the electrons in the brain sort of just are can be random, right? They can sort of generate their own pattern that is unique. Um, Although I will say that again, most thought patterns are rooted in something, right? So, we sort of get programmed when we're children about how we'll probably wind up living out the rest of our life unless we take an active course of change. And again, I don't want to get terribly deep into it. I think it's a really fun subject, but I also think our goal here is to probably provide value. So, what do I think? I think the answer is, uh, well, let's rebase the question, right? So ask the question one more time.
Right. Uh, and to your point about the randomization of reactions from a child, it's like the Punnett square of human reaction. You have your odds of what your reaction is going to be, and then sometimes you, it just goes somewhere else. All right. So the question was, what are some potential risks and challenges associated with deploying AI in defense, and how can we mitigate them?
Yeah. So I think the big risk is in assuming that the language models that we may use or the artificial intelligence that we may use in defense are a good substitute for human judgment. I think I think that is probably the most paramount danger, which is turning too much decision making over into a machine. I think the other thing is that there's an old phrase that everybody knows called trust but verify. And to be really honest with you, another danger of the human element, which is that humans, remember, are the ones labeling this data going into the big data sets that are driving this. There's going to be mistakes. I mean, to give you an idea, one of the companies that is behind building those data sets and having a human label them, I mean, they're using sub minimum wage in, South American countries. Like they're using very, very low paid labor to do this labeling. And so you've got to know that there's going to be some pretty interesting mistakes that will get made along the way. And so I think the danger really becomes, well, how clean is the data set that actually created the answer? How close is the supervision and quality control? There are no quality control standards right now for these language models. They simply do not exist. And in fact, if you ask Bard versus ChatGPT versus Facebook Meta's version of it, you will get different answers. And I think that's very, very interesting when you talk about the idea of essentially a language model or artificial intelligence making a kill or don't kill decision in warfare. I do recall seeing an article recently where they had a drone that was essentially powered by artificial intelligence that decided that because it couldn't accomplish the mission, it would come back and fire upon the the host airport that it came from because it couldn't accomplish the mission because it was being called back to base before the mission was accomplished. So its answer to that was, well, I have an original mission and I haven't accomplished it yet. So I need to go kill the people who are essentially giving me a cease and desist order. That's real. That happened. That article is out there. And I think that again, will we overcome those challenges? Of course. I think that we will absolutely overcome those challenges, and I think we will do that very quickly. We just have to make some mistakes first. I think another interesting question is, what are the mistakes? What are the sacrifices that will be made in an effort to get it right when it comes to defense?
You made an interesting point when you talked about like that artificial intelligence isn't intelligence, and as I even said in this podcast, I've referred to it before as supplemental intelligence, whereas you take something that the operator already knows and you're adding to it. But if you reframe it, I think you're right, where it's like if you're researching a subject, say you're for a school paper, right, and you go to Google or wherever and you type in information, actually reading the information or researching the information or even writing the paper based on the information isn't intelligence. It is on some level just taking in information or copy pasting whatever. The intelligence comes from the retention and repetition of the person after the fact of, did you read the paper and then can you tell me about it later without going back to it? Is it in your mind? That's where the intelligence comes in. So if artificial intelligence is just taking commands and, in some cases of ChatGPT, if you have it hooked up to Google, looking for information, you're right, that's not intelligence at all. That's just following commands.
Yeah,
So
100%.
that's just a thought that I had. Anyway,
Not a great
as
thought.
yeah, thanks. As AI continues to evolve in unprecedented ways, so do its abilities and potential applications in defense. And I think this question is interesting because it goes to kind of what you're talking about with the writer's strike, where they're worried about what AI can do as far as potentially replacing them. So the question is, should there be limitations on the types of AI applications in defense? And if so, how do we define those boundaries?
I think that there are two schools of thought about this whole thing. One is a school of thought that we should regulate artificial intelligence, and another one is that we should not regulate it. And I think, if you look at Elon Musk, he falls into the we should regulate it category. And if you look at some of the other players, like Google, for instance, has not talked a lot about regulating it as loudly. Um, my thought about this is whatever you regulate, you will simultaneously create a black market for. So any attempts at regulating essentially what is nothing more than a computer program are completely fruitless. If you look at the Napster saga, from the early 90s about music sharing, the second that Napster was sort of more or less destroyed, you wound up with the Pirate Bay. You wound up with a million different variations, and frankly, they were all improved. So I think the ultimate reality is that it's coming, it's kind of here, but really, I think there are some things that it can do. I think that and I will just tell you with some inside knowledge from a defense perspective, we already see a lot of the major manufacturers in defense beginning to automate war machines and equipment with that power. Certainly controlled by humans, but in my eyes, I think it is only a matter of time before whether it's regulated or not, or allowed or not, or whatever. I don't think that the world will quite be the same after this. Again, I reflect back to our own experience. There are probably 3 people that don't have to be employed by our company right now because we just simply don't need them because we can go to ChatGPT for free or with a $20 paid membership and literally produce way more than what 3 human beings could produce. War is the perfect place for artificial intelligence to really, become usable. And it's really scary. It's really, really frightening, and I'll give you another great example of that, which is, if you look at what's going on with Ukraine and Russia right now, um, Russia is chock full of nuclear weapons. And, it's probably not a very popular thought, but I think it's only really more or less sort of a matter of time before one of those nuclear weapons is used. If you're thinking without emotion, those nuclear weapons would have just simply already been used. They probably would have been used on day 2 of that attack when the initial approach didn't work. I'm not a politician. I don't get into this kind of stuff, but what I can tell you is if you don't have emotion involved, the answer is really very easy. Go nuke your enemy and hope that your missiles land about 1 second before their missiles land back on you. Warfare, frankly, becomes very, very simple when humans aren't involved. Who cares about destroying some machines? They're not real. They're not, there's no ethics there. There's no morality there. And you can already see that happening. We have drones that are just being thrown. You'd never think it throwing an F-35 jet at buildings the way that they're doing that with drones right now, right? The collateral damage is so minimal in warfare right now with unarmed vehicles that it is to me, I just think it's fascinating. It will be very interesting to see what the future of war is. It's I wish that it was something positive, but it's not. I think ultimately it just gets more dangerous the less emotion you have about something, and I think it starts to become about who wants to solve the problem worse. And then this is also a very interesting time because it's an age for potentially new superior forces to come into play. I mean, it very well could be the case that while the U.S. has been on top of the world for quite a while, some other country who just simply has a strategic advantage, like North Korea, for instance, could just simply wave around, some sort of an artificial intelligence saber versus a nuclear saber. And, that could be pretty intense, particularly if they find ways to affect power and internet. I think probably two of the most common things that humans have come to really rely on. And hey, look, with artificial intelligence hacking becoming something that is on the rise, it's absolutely frightening. It really is. So, yeah, not to get into all of that, I think, basically when we really boil down everything that's going on, I think what we look at is less human casualties, but less human opportunity is probably going to be the end result of this. And, again, for those people who are in control, as is the current reality, those people who are out there building the companies and things like that, they will continue to, prosper, leveraging more and more efficient ways of doing things.
Well, this episode has certainly given me and hopefully our audience a lot to think about. But now we move on from the really, really serious stuff to our favorite part of this whole thing. And I have to admit that today's silly question is one of the sillier ones that we've come up with. I don't know why I chose this one, but here we go. Would artificial intelligence resolve conflicts between countries over a game of rock, paper, scissors?
Absolutely, right? If you put two AI robots together, why couldn't they randomize responses and try to figure out strategy? I think that might be, in my opinion, much better for mankind if we could just get away with artificial intelligence doing our fighting for us in a peaceful, contained way. And hey, look, I think that if Zelensky and Vladimir Putin could just play some rock paper scissors and quit killing their own people, this thing could be settled and probably have the exact same end result. So I think rock, paper, scissors is a much more preferable means to an end than any warfare.
Think I don't know if you've ever played Risk, but it literally, comes down to you have, a certain amount of troops on one side and a certain amount of troops on another, and it's literally decided by rolling the dice, and whichever side has the higher number wins. And if you've ever played it, they have a mobile game version, and you can do like a quick roll, and then you press the thing, and it's like, oh, this side wins because the dice landed that way, and it just happens in seconds. It's like that kind of feel about the same way. It's like, oh well, I played rock paper scissors and I lost, so you can have this territory, or you can do whatever you want now. It's quite
Yeah,
silly.
and that's a great point, which is that, I think that there will be things that happen faster. I'm very surprised that this war in Ukraine has gone for, almost 2 years now. And the reason for that is because I think that either side, given the right set of weapons, could just simply end it. And I think that also talks to the level of pressure that non-war related items has. Again, Russia has a very clear objective and they're not accomplishing it. And it's surprising to me to some extent that they have not brought in their tactical nuclear capabilities to handle their other mistakes. But again, they understand that the world just simply won't tolerate it, or they can't seem to get the assurances from their partners that they'll support it. And I have to tell you that artificial intelligence or not, that's got to be a really major improvement. Just generally speaking, I think it's a really major improvement over, the way that things are today. So, on the bright side, I guess, I would like to, again, look, our business is supported by the war machine, right? So there's an element of that too. And if you're listening to this podcast, your business probably has some element of it that speaks true to as well. Which is a tough thing to basically say, hey, look, you don't want war anymore because it's such a great economic driver. But I think that I think some of the big massive stuff like the nuclear, it's so risky and so devastating that you hope those things, you hope maybe artificial intelligence can maybe have a shot at preventing some of those things from ever happening again. So that's the story. I think ultimately it will be very interesting to see where all of this goes. I think for defense contractors, the biggest concern is an understanding that CUI still has to be protected, and that you're definitely violating ITAR. You're violating CUI if you're sending it out to these artificial intelligence type services. And you really need to be careful about that. That's one of the big takeaways here for defense contractors.
I mean, all it takes is to go to the movie theaters right now and watch Oppenheimer to see all the chaos and the, I guess, pun intended, fallout of the last time a major power dropped a nuke. um, you know, uh, so if AI can kind of mitigate that, who knows? We'll see. We'll see what happens. And that wraps up another great episode of Mission Compliance. We hope our discussion today has provided you with valuable insights, practical strategies, and inspiration to navigate the ever-evolving world of defense. We'd like to thank Mike for joining us again today and giving us another great set of information and answers to our topic. Thanks for joining us, Mike.
Oh, it's always a pleasure, Roman.
But the conversation does not end here. We encourage you to continue exploring these topics and connect with us on our social media channels. Share your thoughts, ask questions, and engage with fellow listeners by using the hashtag Mission Compliance Podcast. You can also visit our website at missioncompliancepodcast.com for show notes, transcript, and bonus content. If you haven't already, don't forget to what, Mike?
Like, subscribe, and we'll see you soon.
Boom. Subscribe to our YouTube channel or wherever you get on your favorite podcast platform to let you know when new episodes like this one are released. And we truly appreciate if you could, like Mike said, take a moment to rate and review the show. Your feedback helps us continue to bring you thought-provoking episodes and high-quality content. Join us again on the next episode of Mission Compliance as we delve further into the world of defense, security, and industry innovation. Until then, take care, stay informed, and make compliance your mission. See you next time.
Thanks, everybody.